Hey guys, how you doing? I thought I would do this short video for you. I'm on my way to a closing now. Got a little drive, and I thought it's a good time to kind of explain one aspect of flipping homes, and that's funding. I've had a lot of people recently come to me and ask me, hey, how can I get involved? I want to be like a partner. I want to invest. I want to give you seed money, or maybe they want to actually do it themselves eventually, but they want to be a partner and invest monetarily to this project. And so I've explained to them there are many different ways for people to get into the investing like this. You don't have to be the one that's actually flipping, but there are a lot of different opportunities to finance or to fund these projects and get a good return on it. One of the ways that I want to explain briefly, kind of get straight to it, is what's called gap funding or gap lending. Some of you have heard of that, some of you have never heard of that before, but I'm going to explain to you what that is. I'm going to use this house as an example. So I'm going to a closing on this property. I purchased this off-market property for $97,000. But for the sake of this example, we're just going to say $90,000. Okay? So let's just say I'm buying the house for $90,000. Now, when you're getting funded for these projects, whether it's hard money, whether it's private money, or your own money, but when it's hard money or private money, what they typically do, they'll fund the purchase price of the house 75, 85, 90%. Sometimes private monies will do 100%. Okay, to get a good relationship with them, they'll do 100% funding. Now that's just the purchase price of the house. But with these type of loans, fix and flip loans, not only are you purchasing the house, but you're also adding in the renovation budget to it. So it's one loan. So let's say the house is $90,000, but the renovation is $50,000. The total project cost is $140,000. Okay, that's the cost of the house plus the renovation. Now, you're not going to get your renovation money immediately. You have to put in draws in order to get that sporadically as you've completed the work. But they'll fund the $90,000 for you to purchase the property. But let's just say, and I'd say most of them are about 90%, they fund 90% of it. So on a $90,000 property, that means you're going to be financed at $81,000. They're going to give you $81,000 towards the $90,000 property that you're purchasing. That means that there's still $9,000 left that you have to come up with yourself. That's that 10% that you come up with yourself. If you were buying a traditional home, if it was your primary, whatever, using a traditional lending, that's your down payment, 10%. And so this is where gap funding comes in. Here's an example. So $97,000 plus rehab, all of this stuff. Let's just say I had to come out of pocket with closing costs, $20,000. But I want to use that house as an example. $90,000, $9,000 basically is what I need to come up with as a down payment. Now on top of that, the term of the loan. Fix and flip loans are short-term loans. So typically they're 6-month loans, 12-month loans, really at the most 12 months. Most of the ones I do, 6 months. You can even get it down to 3 months, but that's risky. To be honest, 6 months is the typical fix and flip loan. And then if you don't complete the project in 6 months, you have to pay a point or whatever to add time to the loan term. But 6 months. So now what a lender wants to see is that you have the $9,000, 10% down payment, and 6 months of mortgages in your reserves. They want to see the reserves of your mortgages. In other words, they want to see that you can pay your mortgage payment for the term of the loan, the 6 months. So they want to see that ahead. That's what you have to come up with. That's called your gap. So your gap is going to be your 10% for the down payment of the property and your 6 months of mortgages in reserves. That is your gap. So I'm going to just this is going to be rough, but for example, this property, $97,000, 10%, 90% is what they financed. I would have to come up with my $9,000 or about $10,000. I come up with about $10,000, and then plus whatever those mortgage payments, estimated mortgage payments are going to be, 6 months of that all together. Okay, so let's just say on this particular deal, my gap would have been about $35,000. That's what they want to see, $35,000 in reserves. That's what you need to show. Okay, so here's where gap funders come into play. Let's say I want to buy this property. Let's say I'm leveraged out and have a bunch of other properties out there. Let's say I have a lender that is willing to lend me the money, but they want to see gap funds of $35,000. Let's say I don't want to use my $35,000 and get it tied up in this property because I got a bunch of other properties. So now I go after what's called a gap funder. Gap funders come in. You go to them, you give them an IP, and you give them an investment proposal, and you tell them, this is what I need for this project. I need $35,000, and this is what it goes towards. And of course, the terms of each gap funder is different. Some are going to charge you equity. Some are going to say, I want 10% or 15%. I've even seen them as high as I want 50% of your return on investment. Most of them are not there. That's very bad rates, terrible rates. I wouldn't even think about something like that. Most of them want a percentage. And so they're loaning the money, the gap funds, for a percentage, a flat rate percentage return. Let's just say that's 40%. The gap funders make a lot of money. Let's say 40%. So let's say they gap fund you at $30,000, okay? And basically, they want a 40% return on that. If a gap funder loans an investor $30,000 at a 40% rate return, that's $12,000 that they're going to make when they get paid. Now, when does a gap funder get paid? Gap funder gets paid at the sale of the house. The sale of the property, the gap funder gets paid immediately at closing. That $12,000 is their profit. So they would have made a $12,000 return on investment. Basically, $42,000 gets back into their account. Now, when do you get the gap funds? The gap funds are sent to closing attorneys or the title company, and they're used at closing to counteract that down payment or the cash to close that you need. That comes out of the gap funds. So the gap funder would have to have the funds already at escrow or wired to the person's account so that it's available at closing. So at closing, let's say they want you to come up with that $20,000. You're taking that out of the gap funds that you got from your gap funder. The rest of the money you should keep in your account and use it to pay the mortgage payments as you're working on the product. So what does this do for the investor? That means that the investor does not have to come out of his or her funds, money, for the project of this property. That means their mortgage payments for the term of the loan is paid, the house was paid. They did not have to come out of their pocket to do it. They used the gap funder to give them the money that they needed to cover these expenses. Now, there's still other expenses. That's another video. But basically, what this does is allow an investor not to have to come out of their money and be leveraged out when they're purchasing these properties. So if you were interested and you want to get into gap funding, you need to find an experienced investor, because you also need to know how to look at IPs. To know how to look at investment proposals, know if it's a good deal or not, because what is the security for a gap funder? Now, a gap funder, when they do it, they are typically put on the second lien position of the property. So there is security to it. Second lien position, which means that if something happens to the property, if it's foreclosed, even when it's sold, first lien position, your lender gets their money first. Second lien position, the gap funder would get their funds second. That's why you need to look at the property, make sure it's a good investment, make sure that they can sell it for what they're saying they can sell it for. And worst case scenario, if it forecloses, you'll be able to get your funds back. But that you will be on the second lien position or the deed of the property itself. That's the security for gap funding. So I don't want to make it even longer, but that's basically the ABC of what gap funding is. Easy way to get in if you want to be an investor, maybe a silent partner. Good rates of return on gap funding, very good. That's why a lot of investors turn into gap funders themselves. simply because it's an easy way to get in without getting your hands dirty, but you have skin in the game, but you also are making a very big rate of return. In fact, the rate of return on gap funders is much greater than the lenders themselves, first position. So there's definitely a lot of people getting involved in gap funding. I hope that helped you out. I'm sure you have a lot more questions, but that's the ABC of gap funding and gap lending. Good luck.